Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the follow-up to the very successful, very awesome, very funny Guardians of the Galaxy back in 2014. And it brings back the crew that we all know and love. It brings back Chris Pratt as Star-Lord. It brings back the sexy-ass Zoe Saldana as Gamora. David Bautista is back as Drax. Bradley Cooper is once again voicing Raccoon Rocket. And that's either Vin Diesel or that's just a really, really cute baby voicing Groot. I don't know. It's Baby Groot is in this movie. You got Merle from The Walking Dead, alright? You got Kurt Russell as Ego in this movie. What this movie basically is okay, the Guardians are on their mission, and they're, this takes place a little bit after the first one. They're an established crew now, they're working together, they're on this mission, and then something happens on the mission that goes wrong. They end up crash landing on this planet, and while they're on this planet, they meet this guy named Ego, played by Kurt Russell, and so the rest of the movie revolves around trying to figure out who this guy is and what he wants, and then that's basically the story, is they're stuck on this planet and they have to try to survive and stuff happens. And that's essentially all I can really say about the story here. Before this movie started, I was pretty damn certain. I was like, look, I don't know how good or bad the movie is going to be, but Baby Groot is probably going to win 2017 by a pretty wide margin. And did I feel that same way after I watched the movie? Well, that's what the review is here for, people. Usually when you're making a sequel, one of the things that could make the sequel potentially better than the first is if you take the characters, the established characters that we know and love from the first movie, and you try to push them in some new directions for the sequel. And I gotta say, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 did a pretty decent job of challenging these characters and pushing them into some surprisingly emotional directions. That was a really awesome thing. We get to see Star-Lord dealing with his father issues in this movie. That was really interesting. We get to see a much more tragic backstory with Gamora and Nebula. You find out a little bit more about Thanos and how much of a bastard that he has been to Nebula and Gamora in this movie, and that stuff was really welcome. I gotta single out Yondu though, because Yondu was probably my favorite thing about this movie. He was the best thing about this movie. Not only did he give the best performance, but you also get the most backstory with him. You find out a lot more about Yondu in this movie. And this movie also takes some time to deal with the relationship between Yondu and Quill and what that really is. Then you get Yondu and Rocket, and you find out there's some parallels there that you didn't think about before. When I first saw Yondu in the first movie, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, he's a funny asshole and he's got a really cool weapon that I'm kind of jealous of because I don't know how to whistle. Yeah, sorry guys, I don't know how to whistle. That's one of the talents I wasn't really blessed with. But Yondu is much more than just a really awesome guy who can whistle with a weapon in this movie. James Gunn understands these characters. He knows how awesome these characters are. He knows what makes them who they are. Instead of just having a sequel where, they're the same characters that they were in the first movie, you get to find out a little bit more about them in the second movie, and then you get to really work on the chemistry and the relationships between the characters. And it really rewards you with an emotional experience. I would say the soundtrack in this movie isn't as good as the soundtrack from the first movie, but it's still a really damn good soundtrack. There's still a few songs that were stuck in my head a few hours later, so that was really cool. If you have a soul, at some point in this movie, involuntarily or voluntarily, you're just gonna be looking at Baby Groot and you're just gonna go, aww, Groot, aww. Baby Groot was awesome. There's some fun action stuff. There's a really satisfying third act action sequence that is really awesome, and visually it's really impressive to look at. There's an awesome Stan Lee cameo. There's an awesome post-credit scene. By the way, there's 5 of those things, so you might want to stick around for a while. I walked away from this movie feeling the way that I felt after Age of Ultron, and spoiler alert, that ain't good, folks. I gotta be honest, guys, I spent about half of this movie bored out of my mind, and a lot of that is due to the first hour and 10 or 20 minutes or so. There really wasn't a story that was happening that I was interested in. Story-wise, there's really not much here. There really wasn't much here. It does pick up in the third act. Towards the end of the second act and the beginning of the third act, the story does pick up a little bit. But really, for that first hour and 20 minutes or so, there's just really nothing much of interest happening, and they try to replace that with humor, and that is really the biggest problem I have with this movie. The first movie movie I felt like was really funny, and the humor was really cool, and it was one of the best parts about that movie. It was really a big action comedy, and the comedy really landed for me. In this movie, most of the comedy really didn't. I laughed like 3 times during the entire movie. A lot of the humor felt forced. A lot of it felt a little bit out of place. Sometimes they would say jokes where you just don't really need to say jokes, and sometimes they would have a joke that would just keep going over and over and over again to the point that it's just really not that funny anymore. The first hour plus of this movie, it's pretty much happy hour at the Improv. Like, it just felt like all they were doing was trying to throw as many jokes at the audience as they could and sacrificing a really compelling story and narrative at the same time. There's this subplot, I guess you could call it a subplot, that pops up in the movie with these gold people that are chasing after the Guardians, and it's... why are they in the movie? They didn't need to be in the movie. They feel kind of useless. They're just kind of there. They're just something that's there to chase the Guardians and to create some extra action, I guess. I'd say none of the characters really kick as much ass as they did in the first movie, with the exception of maybe Quill. It's kind of a half and half thing, because you gotta focus on character development before you focus on awesome action. I'm just saying the first movie had more of a balance, and in this movie, none of the characters really did much of anything when it comes to action. I do think that there was a positive experience overall for me with this movie. I can recommend this movie, but I can't highly recommend this movie, which is kind of disappointing. This movie, again, made me feel like Age of Ultron. It's still entertaining in some spots. It's not a movie that I'm gonna be rushing back out to watch. I'm gonna push it and say that it's kind of a golden age sequel. Alright guys, those are my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy 2. You probably should go check it out. I'm sure a lot of you will like it and enjoy it. I just didn't really enjoy it as much as I hoped I would. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show. Follow me on Twitter at SuperfanHM, and if you like what you see, tell me how you feel, and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace!